Welcome to Kevin's European Garage, and today I'm going to be installing these Feal 441 Plus coilovers in my 1999 Porsche 996. So before I get started installing these and taking the car apart, I'm going to measure the height of the car where it sits right now. I currently have Eibach lowering springs in here, and I kind of like the height of the front wheel, but not so much of the rear. The rear is really low, and I have a tendency to rub going over bumps, so I want to raise that up a little bit. So I want to take the measurements of where I'm currently sitting on this car, and then I can go from there about how I want to adjust it. So here I'm going to take my tape measure and make sure that I have it aligned up right in the middle of the wheel. So make sure it's on the ground. So this thing is reading 25 and 3/4. So I'm going to do this for all the wheels. I suggest making sure that you're perfectly straight up and down. Try to line it up towards the middle right here, so you get the so you can get a good ride height. Okay, so after going around and measuring all four corners of the car, definitely tell that these things they haven't settled very equally over the years. So I've got my left front is 25 3/4, my right front is 25 1/2, my left rear is 24 3/16 of an inch, and my right rear is 25 3/16 of an inch. So I got a little bit of a difference between sides. So it would be nice to have this so I can level it out and I can make it the same all the way around. And I think I might want to stay at probably about 25 1/2 inches around is what I think where I want to end up settling this car out at. So now I can start taking apart the front suspension. Okay, we're going to set up the preload on the spring, and on the front one, what you're supposed to do is that you have to, and this also goes for the rear, is you have to measure the total shock piston length over here. And when I did that, I ended up coming out with 106 millimeters. So, and you're talking about the whole thing, including where the bump stop is. So you want to basically measure the whole shiny part from there all the way down to here. So I came up with approximately 106 millimeters. And when you do it with their calculation, so you take 106 millimeters, divide that by 0.8, which is your suspension, I guess they call it stroke. Then the wheel travel, which is which ended up being 0.35. So you 106 millimeters divided by 0.8 times 0.35 ends up equaling 46.375 millimeters. And when you translate that into inches, you're looking at a total of 1 inch total in droop on the front. And when you do the same thing for the rear, so I did the exact same thing. I measured all the way from in here all the way down to over to here, so I got the total shaft length. And then on the rear it's 82 millimeters, so you take the 82 divided by 0.8, then you multiply that by 0.35, and you come out with 35.88 millimeters as far as droop, and that translates to 1.4 inches. So I'm looking at for 1.8 in the front approximately and 1.4 in the rear. So now I can put these in the car. Okay, so now I'm ready to start taking apart the suspension. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the brake caliper, and I'm going to set it aside on this little cart I have over here, so you're going to be able to support this while you're taking this whole thing apart. So let's do that first. You have a 10 millimeter bolt over here. Next, let's disconnect the electrical connection from the strut. You just have to push back. It just slides into a slot. So you push back on that. And then now let's get rid of the connection over here. So now let's disconnect this over here. Just lift up on this tab. Slide the two electrical connections out to the bottom. And take the 10 millimeter bolt out. Okay, next, now we're going to disconnect the caliper from the knuckle. And these are held on by two 10mm Allens. And they shouldn't be this tight. There we go. It take a little while to work these things out. I want to be careful. I don't want to strip them out or anything. Just go back and forth. Okay, so I ran into a little bit of a snag here. The caliper bolt on the bottom over here is frozen in the knuckle. So I'm gonna have to spend some time extracting this, but I think my the knuckle over here is pretty much gonna be shot. I don't think I'll be able to clean up the threads and make it any good. So I have to kind of put the car together and kind of move it out of the center of the garage. But I did manage to do on the other side, I managed to put that one together. That was kind of like my practice run, kind of getting it so I knew exactly what it was gonna look like and everything. And so this side is all done all together. It actually went pretty smooth. This side didn't have any frozen bolts or anything like that. So now it's gonna be interesting. I have it on the highest setting, also with the shim in there, and I'm gonna see where the car actually ends up sitting when I lower it down. And so right now I'm pretty much at a standstill until I get that out. And okay, so it's been a few days later. So what I did is I sprayed some PB Blaster on there and I let it sit for a few days. And actually it freed up. And I was able to get out the lower bolt with actually not really doing any damage at all to the threads. What I ended up doing is I took out both bolts, I ran a tap through them, and I was able to clean out a little bit of debris that was still in there, and the threads look like they're in really good shape. And I can't use the old bolts again. I mean, they're just in pretty bad shape. Plus, you're not really supposed to use them anyways. It looks like someone did a, replace the at least one bolt on the front, because that's different than what's over here. And this one is that's a Torx, and this is a hex. And you can see that this one got a little chewed up on the end. This was the upper one, and this is the lower one. So I just ran a tap through it. It was a 12 by 1.5 tap. And then I also use this, instead of using those T's, what's pretty cool about this little tool is that the tap will slide right into it. So you can use a 3/8 drive on there and be able to do that instead of having to use that T. And so I did buy some new bolts from Porsche. I bought enough to replace all the front caliper bolts. So I should be ready now to finish installing the left front strut in the car. And just in case I wasn't able to take the bolt out, and what I did is I picked up a time cert kit. And the time cert is, it's similar to the Healy coil, except, being the coil, this is an actual complete rethread. So it's pretty much the same thing where you got to drill it out, tap it to an oversized, but you also have to countersink it with this. And then you put this in and then you install it, and then on the very bottom, the threads aren't completely formed on the inside. So when you put it in, it expands it and locks it in place. So this is definitely a much better repair than using a Healy coil, which you just kind of wrap the little coil in there and hope it holds. This is more permanent. The only drawback to this is a kit like this is like $100 as opposed to buying a Healy coil kit. Okay, so now that I got those caliper bolts on, I got the caliper aside, let's start getting back onto this. So I just have this little seat over here, and I'm just putting this on the side. It makes a nice rest for the caliper. So let's take out this bracket for the harness that has the ABS sensor, the brake pad wear sensor. All right, let's next disconnect the tie rod. You can really hear that strut top. Now let's disconnect sway bar link. Normally it's not like this, but the other side was done, so the sway bar is at a different location compared to this side to the other side. So it's a little tight. Hopefully this doesn't give me a hard time coming out. And I think it is, so I'm gonna have to jack up this side to match the other side. All right, now I can lower this down. Now up to the top. Okay, so you're gonna remove the battery cover. And then you get this T25 Torx. And now you've got the top of the strut over here. All right, and these are 14 millimeter nuts over here. But what we're gonna do is that, because these holes are slotted, I'm just gonna mark it with a Sharpie, just so I know where they are, so I can put it back at the same spot again. Probably be adjusting them to something different. These things look like they don't have a lot of camber, and I think I want to go about 2 degrees in the front, so I'm just gonna have this, I'm gonna adjust this probably a little bit later. And I was thinking of picking up one of those little camber gauges that attach to the rotor. And there's so much room in this car in the spokes of the wheels that I can actually just reach in there, tilt it back, and mess around with the camber on the car. So these are 14 millimeters. We'll take these up next. And just make sure you have a hand on the strut so that when you take that last one out, it doesn't just fall right down to the ground. Now I've seen people just push down on this and slide it underneath the fender. And just in case I can't do it or if it doesn't work out right and I can't push down far enough, I don't want to scratch the car. So let's put a little bit of tape on here. Kind of see if we can help from that happening. It's just blue painter's tape. All right, so let's give this a go. So see if I can push this down and slide it out. Well, it can be done. It takes a lot of effort though. And oh yeah, there's a clip that holds on the electrical cable over here. And I forgot about that. Don't forget about it because I broke it, so I'm gonna have to go pick one up at the dealer. And just take a little Scotch-Brite and clean out inside here. This is definitely corrosion, and I just want to try to eliminate some of that. When I did the other side, I actually pulled the whole knuckle off. I don't know if you're gonna be able to do what I just did with the stock struts, because I already had the I-box springs in here, so I had a little bit more, I had a less tall strut, so you might not be able to do what I just did. Maybe you can give it a try. If not, you know, the book says pull off the knuckle, so. All right, so here's the strut. This should just slide in nice. Yeah, you did on the other side. There we go. Slide it up into position. So now I'm going to jack this up so I can put the strut top up over here. Okay, but I'm up top now, and I'm just gonna line these things back up and just gonna pay attention to where I made some marks, so at least you can keep it somewhat where you had it before. And these get torqued at 27 foot-pounds. Sorry, it's not a 14 millimeter, it's 13. All right, so what you want to do now is you want to jack up the strut. You want to make sure this thing bottoms out because there's no other way to lock it in place. It's not like it has a groove in it or something like that. So you want to make sure this bottoms out onto the mount over here. And we're gonna put the sway bar link back in. And this will hold it in place. We'll put the tie rod back up also. This gets tightened up to 63 foot-pounds. And this gets torqued down to 56 foot-pounds. 56 foot-pounds. Now let's reconnect up the harness. Actually, no. That's right, that bracket's not gonna work on this because that was on the strut. So I'll have to figure out some way to attach this to the strut to keep it from moving around like how it did on the original. Let's make it tight. Let's plug in the connectors. They're different, so you can't mess it up. So that was the ABS sensor. Okay, now it's time to put the caliper back on. And these are my new caliper bolts. And the new bolts are actually a T55. And these get torqued to 56 foot-pounds. Okay, now it's time to connect up the wear sensor. Kind of runs underneath the strut, and it goes back into the harness. And don't forget, we got a little connector, a little clamp that holds the this wire to the brake hose. And the brake hose gets attached to the knuckle with a 10mm bolt. Here's a 10mm bolt. There's a little clip that holds the cable on. All right, so now that this is done, we can put the tire back on, and we can actually adjust for how much droop there is in the suspension. Where I left off in my video, I had just lowered the car down to the ground. And my kid had come out and said, hey, can we go for a ride? I'm like, sure, why not? You know, I got the front done, the car's back on the ground, everything's tight. So I go take it for a ride. And I can tell you, just from doing the fronts, the steering response is amazingly so much better than it was before. But I did have a problem. And my problem is I got a nasty rattle. So what ended up happening was that this car has always had just a little bit of a rattle. And I always attribute it to strut tops, because I had changed pretty much everything else in there. You know, when I had the lower control arms out, I inspected the ball joints. Those came back good. I replaced the bushings. I got new inner and outer tie rods. I got new control links. I've got sway bar links, sway bar bushings. And I originally thought it was just the strut tops. And I'm like, you know, I'm putting coilovers in there. You know, I'll just deal with it later, no big deal. I didn't try to diagnose it or anything. Well, I was wrong. So after driving around and taking the car apart and looking at it a bunch of times, I have a bad steering rack. So internally, the shaft that goes back and forth, it rattles up and down. And before with the stock, well, I would say the stock struts and the iBox springs and then the, you know, the rubber bushing on the strut top, you know, you could hear it, but it wasn't that bad. But now with the stiff springs, the solid mount, and stiff shocks, you hear everything. It is just, it rattles really bad. So this car ain't going anywhere. So I got to order I have to order a steering rack. And I had left off saying that I was going to show you guys how to set up the preload on the springs, and you know that's going to be actually in part 2 of this video. And so part 2 is going to be doing the rears because I haven't done those yet because I've been spending all my time trying to figure out what's wrong with the front. And I also show you how to set preload. And but right now I'll show you exactly what's wrong with the steering rack. All right, so here I'm going to grab this and I'm going to shake it up and down, and you're going to be able to hear the rattle. So I have new inner and outer tie rods, and what ended up happening when I move it up and down, you can actually see this inside here moving up and down, and that's what's rattling. So that's why I need a new steering rack. So thanks for watching Kevin's European Garage. Thanks for watching part 1 of my Feal coilover install. I was hoping to do this in one video, but it looks like it's going to be 2. And please subscribe, like, don't forget to ring that notification bell, and I'll see you soon.